Hello, poem coaxers. Welcome back to Gratitude. This is my little writing house, and I am Amy Ludwig VanDerwater from the Poem Farm. Welcome to Coaxing Poem Visit 6. And we will call today's visit Give It Space, because today we'll be talking all about line breaks and stanzas and the white space around our poems. See, one thing that's different with poems than writing prose or non-poems is that we decide as poets, where do we want to go to new lines in our poems? We make these decisions. So if I show you a chapter book I love, a novel I love called Sourdough by Robin Sloan, and I open it up to any page, one thing you'll see is there are these big blocks of text. There are paragraphs. And when we see these paragraphs, we know maybe a new speaker is speaking or we're at a new setting, and they're huge chunks of text. When we look at a poem book, such as this one, which is my book With My Hands, and I open up to a page and I see a poem, it's not a big block of text, but rather it might be a long, skinny poem with one line by itself. Or it might have these chunks of text with space around them. When we call these chunks in poems, not paragraphs, we call them stanzas. So this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas. This one has 2 stanzas, but one is just one line all by itself. So as writers, we decide, as writers who write poems, we decide when would I like my reader to go to a new line and slow down, pausing at the end of each line. If I'm writing in my notebook just about my day, then what happens is I'm writing along about my day, but I'm not thinking, where do I want to end this line? I just end wherever I run out of room. If I'm typing here on my computer, or I'm typing something, if I was Robin Sloan typing this book, I wouldn't usually think, where do I want to go to a new line? On style, you can see there's a paragraph that's one word all by itself, like I waited. If you see that white space, that's a poetic technique. It's showing the readers, oh, this is very important. It's all alone. Because as poets, we choose, where do I want to break the lines? Where do I want to go to a new line? It is not a random thing. It is a decision that poets make. We make it for many reasons. And sometimes we might write poems and then a poem and then say, I don't really like these line breaks. I'm going to change them. I'm going to now take these same words and write them in a different way. Now, this week I've had something that's been on my mind, and it is the pine cones in my yard. I have a lot of trees, and they've been just dropping these pine cones. And I love pine cones. I always want to pick them up. I bring them in. I always imagine making all these crafts out of them. If you have great pine cone craft ideas, please send them my way. And I collect them. And when I was looking at the big ones, little ones, all shapes, and when I was looking at them, I thought, you know what? I also like collecting shells when I'm lucky enough to be at a beach. And a funny thing is pine cones and shells are both really beautiful, intricate, natural objects. And I thought, wow, I never thought of this before, but pine cones are like the shells of the forest. Although seeds live in here, not little critters. Well, sometimes little critters live in here too, but they're not from the tree. So I kept thinking about that. Pine cones are like the shells of the forest, and I've been holding on to it, wanting to write about it. And I did. But what I wrote did not, it sounds kind of poemy, but it does not look like a poem at all. Let me show it to you. First of all, I wrote a lot about it. And then I sort of really said, now I'm going to try to write something that feels poetic a little bit. And here it is. I'll read it to you. And what you'll notice is when you see it, you can see crossouts, you can see changes I've made, but you can tell it really doesn't look like a poem. It looks more paragraph than a poem. And so I'm going to show you how I can make it, part of it, look like a poem too. So I'll read it to you. It doesn't have a title yet, but that's okay. I usually write my titles last. Pine cones fell like raindrops from the sky that winter day. Wind sang a song of letting go. They pattered on the grass. Each pine cone was free now, like a note freed from that song. Like shells upon a forest beach, they waited for the boy. And he arrived, like every year, to bring one pine cone home, to hold one pine cone to his ear, to listen to the great horned owl. Now, it sounds kind of poemy to me, but it does not look poemy at all. Now, first of all, about the pine cone in the ear. If I hold this pine cone up to my ear, I can imagine hearing an owl or the trees swaying or deer hoof prints, being made in the pine needly mud. I can imagine these things. I don't really hear them, but in my imagination, I can. When we pick up a shell and hold it to our ear, people often say it sounds like the ocean, right? Because we hear this echoiness from inside the shell. So I've said, if the pine cones are like the shells of the forest beach, then maybe I could hold one to my ear and hear a forest thing, right? But it doesn't look like a poem. So what I can do is a couple different things. One thing I can do is I can take a pen or a pencil and grab one here, and I can actually put slash marks in my paragraphy poem. So I might have right now it says pine cones fell like raindrops from. But that's not really where I want readers to pause. I don't want readers to pause after from. I want them to pause after raindrops. So pine cones fell like raindrops. Go to a new line. From the sky that winter day. Go to a new line. See, so now when I recopy it, the slash means, Amy, go to a new line, or when I type it. So it would look like this. Pine cones fell like raindrops from the sky that winter day. Now, as the reader, I know where to pause. I know where the poet wants me to pause just a bit. But maybe I would go back and put more slashes in. Maybe I want it to slow down even more. Then it might be like this. Pine cones fell like raindrops from the sky that winter day. Right? Slows down a little bit more. Or maybe I would do something completely different and have this. Pine cones fell like raindrops from the sky that winter day. I really like this that by itself, but I do like the motion because the pine cones really are falling. So I have this that's a little bit more quick, this that slows the reader down is a shorter stanza, and this that shows some motion. So they're the exact same words. I don't have punctuation here. I need a period here and here. But they're the exact same words. A reader would read them differently solely based on the line breaks because the poet decides where are the line breaks. So, why and when and how do we make these decisions? Well, there are lots of reasons, but here are a few. You could think about one, when you're writing your poem, where do you want your reader to pause just a little bit? Put a line break there. Or make a whole new stanza, a whole new chunk of lines. Another thing you might ask yourself is, do I have a repeated line? If you repeat a line, it might be a good thing, and not always, you choose. But oftentimes, what poets do is they say, my repeated line, I'm not only going to repeat the words the same way, I'm going to repeat the way it looks the same way. So if I say, pine cones pattered down, and I later want to say pine cones pattered down, I will leave it exactly the same way because readers enjoy repetition. So that's another reason. I might also change stanzas or new lines if a new speaker is speaking. There's a new idea. If I'm comparing something to something else, I might do this. I might go to a new line or to a new stanza if I'm in a new location or that's a different feeling or a different mood. So we decide when and where do we want to have these breaks? When do we want to give it space? When do we want to give our poem space around the lines and around the stanzas? I might also say, I want to show motion in my poem. If my poem is about jump roping, maybe I'll have the lines be up and down somehow so that the reader feels like they're jump roping as they read it. So, oh, lastly, if a line is very important, I want to let that line also be on its own. So if there's something I just want to sink deeply into my reader's mind or heart or spirit, I will let that be alone. Maybe even maybe just a line by itself in a stanza, but maybe a line just as its own stanza. It's so important. It's all by itself. That is a decision I can make. And I guess we could compare this, giving it space, giving our poem space. Give it space is good advice in a poem, and it's also good advice in a life. So if my day is so full of so many things to do, and I have to do this and do that activity and that activity and that activity, and I can become stressed. It's so much that it's hard to enjoy any one of those things. What I need to do is give it space. Maybe I need to just sit still for a little while and think, or just stare out the window without a device near me. Maybe what I want to do is close my eyes and lie down on the couch for 5 minutes and just let my kitty crawl up on me. Give it space. Because, see, it's space, both in our lives and in our poems, that helps us and helps our readers know what matters. We can't just have words, 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 or busyness, busyness, busyness. It's the space around these words and the space around our activities that make us who we are, make our poems who they are. So I encourage you to find something in nature and listen to it. And thank you again for joining me here for Visit 6, Coaxing Poems. Give it space. Give it space, your poem. Give yourself space too. Thank you very, very much for visiting. Maybe I'll see you next week.